it's possible that we haven't. I used to be part of the staff team here, but I actually work for the Church of England now, and my job title is Head of Vocations. That's not just about vicars, although there is quite a lot about vicars. It's about helping people to recognise across the whole Church of England God's calling. So it's a particular treat for me to be here this morning, but I'm not sure it was planned, but today is known as Vocation Sunday in the Church of England. So if we go out a few vicars better off at the end of this service, well, I'll be delighted. If we go out a few lay readers, if we go out a few guide or scout leaders, if we go out a few extra special community servers, as a result of this, I'll be thrilled. If we meet Jesus along the way, that would be the best thing. So I wonder, in your house, this is a bit of a Marmite question. In your house, do you watch Strictly Come Dancing? Oh, don't leave me hanging, come on. Do you watch Strictly? Oh, there's some people very embarrassed to admit that they may possibly have watched an episode of Strictly. Strictly in our house is a big deal and has been for years. I have been in the studio audience at Strictly. I love it. And I'm not afraid to admit that Saturday nights in the autumn get a little bit brighter and a little bit happier because of the sequins and the sparkles and the thing that they put on week by week that everyone just seems to love being a part of. And you can imagine the scenario in the show when somebody has a celebrity and a professional dancer. I guess I don't need to explain the format to most people. Even if you're too embarrassed to admit you've watched it, you probably know what it is. It's a dancing competition. And you get a celebrity who's more of a celebrity at the end than they were at the beginning of the process. That's usually true. Ow! And a professional dancer who are always brilliant. And they would have done some samba, and it'll be really exciting. Or they've done some really beautiful, floaty Viennese waltz in beautiful costumes. And everyone like me will be in tears because it's been so moving. And the moment is electric at the end of the dance. And the audience erupts, and it's so exciting. And they just can't believe how beautiful what they've seen is. And there's joy, and there's delight, there's electricity. And Tess Daly in her beautiful dress and high heels comes on, can't get a word in edgeways because everyone's standing up, and they're so excited. And then in comes Craig Revel-Horwood. And Craig Revel-Horwood's job, it seems to me, that he's sort of invented and developed for himself, is to suck the joy out of that moment. It's his job to be critical. It's his job to overanalyze, sometimes justifiably, I have to admit. His job to overanalyze. It's his job to be very monotone, and I think on purpose, to recognize the euphoria that's up here and say, I'm not joining in with any of that. That's just nonsense. You've all let your emotions get carried away with you. I'm here. I'm on this level kind of plane. I recognize and value him as a person, but I think sometimes he takes that job a little bit too far. In our reading in John's Gospel this morning, we have these really iconic verses. If you've been in church or in Bible study groups for any length of time, I dare say that you've come across this particular passage. And it's Jesus describing both his own vocation. So God has called Jesus. Jesus' vocation is pretty unique, isn't it, in the way that he ministers and the way that he goes to the cross, the way that he is among people and the way that he is for us today. So he's describing his own vocation as a shepherd, and he's also describing other people's vocation. He talks about calling to other people. And so in his own vocation, Jesus describes himself as a shepherd, and he also describes himself as a gate for the sheep. And sometimes we have to take a passage of scripture on its own, because otherwise we try and read the whole thing every Sunday, and that wouldn't end well. But sometimes it's just really important to locate these verses in what's going on around them. So I just want to do that for a moment. So John's Gospel, obviously one of the 4 accounts of when Jesus was in his earthly ministry. And it's a book of 2 halves, really, if you've ever read it through. So perhaps chapters 1 to 12, the first half, part 1, is called the Book of Signs. And it's punctuated by miracles. And John develops a story in these first 12 chapters about who Jesus is, about his identity, about his power, about the fact that he has supernatural ability given to him by God and the Holy Spirit. And that's kind of the first half of the book. And the second half of the book, which is chapters 13 to 21, 9 whole chapters on Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, not very much on Easter Saturday, and then Easter Sunday and some following appearances. A lavish 9 chapters on basically 3 days of history. So John really obviously thinks that's pretty important. So let's locate ourselves where we are. So we've got part 1 and part 2. We're just coming to the end of part 1, where we are this morning in the book of signs. And this exchange between Jesus and some Pharisees is located between 2 miracles. It's located just after a miracle where Jesus heals a blind man. And it's located on the run-up to what is kind of the climactic end of part 1, which is where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. These things roll off the tongue, don't they, if we're familiar with the Gospels. He's healed a blind man, and he's just about to raise someone from the dead. Extraordinary. So as I say, he's just healed a blind man, and I just want to tell you briefly, we haven't had it in our reading, I just want to tell you briefly a little bit about what's just gone before. It's not really a big spectacle. It just happens at the side of the road as Jesus is walking along. This is all in chapter 9 if you want to read it a bit later. And we might think that it was cause for a party, that Jesus stops at the side of the road, he takes some mud, he puts it on the eyes of this blind man, and the blind man can see. Now, of itself, that is extraordinary. I mean, in the truest, literalist sense of the word, that doesn't ordinarily happen, does it? It's extraordinary. And you would think that was cause for a party, not just because he can see, but actually in the Jewish tradition, there was a sense in which if you had something wrong with you, a disability or a blemish of some kind, there was, unhelpfully perhaps, well, definitely unhelpfully, a sense that you'd done something wrong, or someone in your past had done something wrong, that you deserved that situation that you were in, and therefore there was a sense of exclusion. There was a sense of you're not quite ready to be, we're not quite appropriate for you to be part of the community. We hold you to one side. So in this healing, it's not just that Jesus has allowed him to see, although that is extraordinary and a gift. It's that he has brought this man back into communion, into community. He can come back into the fellowship. He can come back to his neighbours and his community. He's no longer excluded. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, that is the moment at the end of the dance when everyone is up on their feet, cheering like crazy, celebrating. This is amazing. It's brilliant. But then onto the scene comes, not Craig Revel Horwood in this instance, come the Pharisees. Now, actually, I do have, it won't come across particularly this morning, I have some sympathy with the Pharisees. They have a long and difficult history. They've been attacked from all sides. They've had their temple desecrated in recent history. And they minister really out of a place of fear. They minister out of a place of being damaged. And so they seek to control, and they seek their own purposes, their own ends. But in this particular situation, you can tell there's already some tension because the community knows the first thing they need to do when they hear this man has been healed is they have to take him to the Pharisees to get their view, to get their take on what's happened. So that's what they do. And they go to the synagogue, and the Pharisees are furious. The Pharisees are furious. They accuse the man of being a sinner. They accuse Jesus of being a sinner. They don't take the man's word for it, so they drag the man's parents into the synagogue to say, what on earth, is this really your son? Are you sure? I mean, seriously? And then they say, are you sure he was blind? How traumatizing is that when they've lived a whole life of their son not being able to see and being excluded? Are you sure? I mean, yeah. And then they go on and say, well, what's going on here? And the parents are so afraid to say the wrong thing because they think they will also then be turned out of the synagogue, that they, frankly, hang the son out to dry a little bit. And they say, ask him, he's of age, let him answer. So they pull the blind man who can now see back into the room. And in the end, it's so aggressive. And you can read it in John. It's really quite, it's dramatic. And they end up physically, aggressively, violently throwing him out of the synagogue. If ever there was a moment where the joy and the delight and the celebration and the love and the electricity had been sucked out of a moment, that was it. That really was it. And Jesus gets to hear about what's happened. And I love this about Jesus. He doesn't think, oh, that's a shame, and carry on because he's got this really important journey towards Jerusalem to be going on. He goes and seeks out the man. And there's this really profound encounter between the man who was blind and who now can see and Jesus. And he's been healed. The man's still healed, he can still see, but this next encounter is almost like a second healing, where Jesus, I sense, feels like he needs to kind of mitigate that really awful behavior of the Pharisees. And so Jesus asks the blind man, do you believe in the Son of Man? Now that phrase, the Son of Man, is a phrase from the Old Testament, comes from Daniel chapter 7, and anyone in the Jewish tradition would have understood that Jesus was saying, do you believe in the Messiah? Do you have hope for this anointed king who will come and save your people? Do you have hope for this different future brought about by the coming of the Son of Man, the Messiah? And the blind man says, show me where he is so I can see him. I mean, that in itself is profound, isn't it? He now said, I'll be able to see, actually be able to see the Son of Man. And Jesus says, it's me. I am the Son of Man. I am that person. And John tells us in chapter 9 that the man's response was to say, Lord, I believe. And it goes on to say, and he worshipped him. That was his first response. Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. So this man has had a healing experience which has been tarnished, pretty spoilt, wrecked, really, by the behavior of the Pharisees. And Jesus, as the shepherd he is, has gone out to seek him to put that right, to re-heal him, to give him hope, to restore him, to reveal himself to him, to say, I am that Son of Man. But Jesus is pretty cross with the Pharisees. He's pretty cross with the way that they have chosen to behave, to suck the joy out of that moment, to bring it down, to stop the celebration. And so where we come to in these verses in chapter 10 are Jesus comparing the way he has dealt with that situation to the way that they have dealt with that situation. And I think it's really important for us to have that background story as we come to these words in John chapter 10 this morning. Jesus directly compares his ministry with the ministry of the Pharisees. He is the shepherd. The Pharisees are the strangers. The Pharisees have come to prove their point, and in so doing, they steal joy. They protect their way of doing things. They minister from fear. He comes to lead the sheep for their own well-being, for their own salvation. I loved Esther's prayers that were focused on Jesus as a bringer of joy. That's what Jesus' ministry was about. But because of their sensitivity, their defensiveness, their fear, the Pharisees can't see Jesus as anything other than a threat. So they spoil the miracle. They're the thieves, the bandits, the hired hands out to meet their own objectives, their own ends, no matter what the cost. But Jesus is the complete opposite. Famously in John 10:10, he says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I came to that guy on the side of the road. You know that? I came to him. I saw he had a need. I saw he was excluded. I saw his life was difficult. And I wanted him to have full life. And I healed him, and you wrecked it. And so as a shepherd, I went out to find him again, to protect him, to be his gate against those who would come against him. I wonder if any of us feel today like we need a gate or a shepherd who will bring us that life to the full. Because living life to the full means being able to see the miracle for what it is and celebrating it. Part of our shared life together, there's other stuff too that's important, but a key part of our shared life together is celebrating. So great to hear this morning of new babies, that we can celebrate together. That is part of what it is to be a community of the church, part of God's kingdom. Living life to the full means recognizing the shepherd, recognizing for Jesus for who he is, and choosing to follow. Jesus says, I call them by name and they follow. It means accepting Jesus' offer of relationship and restoration and protection and salvation and love. It means living life to the full means having Jesus as your gate, your passage through life. Living life to the full means accepting the profound and willing sacrifice Jesus makes as he suffers and gives his life away to those who follow him. Living life to the full means deciding to follow Jesus. I wonder if those words resonated with anyone this morning that we sang. I have decided to follow Jesus. We must learn to recognize and distinguish his voice above the noise and the clamor of life. I wonder how often we do manage, it's tough, isn't it, when life is so full, how often we manage to stop. And actually our intercessory prayer is really important, but actually this passage tells us it's really important to listen, to expect Jesus to say something to us. And specifically, he calls us by name. Your name differentiates you from the person you're sitting next to. Unless it's very unlikely. At our Christmas dinner table, there are people with exactly the same name, first, middle, and surname, sitting next to each other. So this doesn't work in that rare scenario. My sister-in-law and I share exactly the same name, although she's doctor and I'm reverend, so that helps. But your name is differentiated. So Jesus' call to you is both general and global. He says, come follow me, to everybody who will listen. But it's differentiated. He calls you by name. So are you listening? Are you listening to what that could be? It's an ongoing thing as well. That doesn't stop on your 18th birthday when you've chosen your degree course. It doesn't stop when you get the promotion at work. It doesn't stop when you've settled into a community. That's a task, a lifelong task, is listening for the call of the shepherd. He calls his sheep by name, verse 3. He leads them out. He goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him. And as Jesus called himself a shepherd, again in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish times, it would have absolutely resonated with the people listening, and particularly the Pharisees. Psalm 23. Psalm 23, really one that we know well, but I'm just going to read it to you because I think this is important for us this morning as well as we think of the shepherd. So it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths, even for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Again, really famous verses using this idea of God or Jesus as the shepherd. And we know that living life to the full means all of the things I've talked about accepting miracles, about accepting Jesus' protection, about following his call and listening for his voice. But it doesn't mean that everything is peaceful and perfect all the time, does it? I suspect you are well aware of that. And David, the psalmist, he talks about being led by still waters. He talks about being restored, but he talks about the image of the valley. In their search for grazing and water, which was not straightforward. It wasn't like being in Salisbury, in the wilderness of the promised of the Holy Land. That was mountains and desert and ruggedness. And as they search for grazing and water, the flock has to pass through deep valleys. The valleys are dark and the air is dry and heavy and the heat is oppressive and there's danger. As followers of Jesus, we're not always called to remain on those luscious pastures or by the lake. So some of us here today might locate ourselves in the valley, struggling with difficult terrain. And the psalmist makes this really difficult declaration: even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. I don't see this as a promise of us not to worry. I don't think that's realistic. Our bodies are designed, our brains are wired up to worry. That's the fight or flight kind of mode. But it is a statement of intention, even in the darkest times, in the moments where you find yourself in the valley. It's a statement of intention. I'm going to stay close to the shepherd. I'm going to trust the shepherd. And it goes on in the psalm, doesn't it, to say he lays a table in the presence of my enemies. It's not like the bad stuff's over here and just for a while we're going to go over here. No, it's all happening at the same time. He lays a table in the presence of my enemies. Those people seated at the dining table on the floor of the dark valley receive, I think, special attention from the Lord. Their shepherd is close. And this too is part of that full life that Jesus promises us in John 10:10. So I just want to give us a moment to reflect on these words and to wonder how God is talking to us this morning. Actually, I'm going to invite us to stand, if you're able, if you can. Shall we stand together? And maybe just close your eyes if you want to. Actually, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes because that just perhaps helps other people around us. So the first thing I want to perhaps ask you is whether you can see in yourself something of that man, the blind man who'd been healed. And when Jesus goes on to say, I'm that person, I am the Son of Man, I am the Messiah, the first thing that he wants to say is, Lord, I believe. And for some of us here, we may have been coming to church for a little while, we may have been coming to church for years, but we just haven't quite got round to making a decision about that. Or maybe we did make a decision a long time ago and it was marked in some way, but actually we've gone away from that. And this offers us a moment, an opportunity to come back and restate, to re-respond, Lord, I believe. And if that's you, just imagine yourself in that encounter with Jesus. He's healed once. He's seen you being put in a really difficult situation. He's seen that oppression, that violence that has been meted out on you, and he comes to be your gate. And he says, by the way, I'm the person who was promised. Maybe just in your heart you want to say, Lord, I believe, whatever your situation is, in the valley or on the pastures or by the lake, Lord, I believe. Can I just say, if that is a real moment for you, like first time or returning after a while, and you want to come and pray, there's going to be a time of worship when I've finished. Just feel free to come and stand, and I would love to pray with you. I'm sure others would too. It's really an enormous privilege when that happens. It's hugely exciting. I just encourage you not to go if that's something important for you, without doing something about it. And secondly, perhaps that image of the valley really resonates with you today. Perhaps you're saying, I really want that life that you've promised, Jesus, that life in all its fullness. I really want that abundant living, but I'm fending off this situation. I'm fending off the thieves and the bandits. I'm fending off those enemies. And I don't feel life to the full. And Jesus wants to say, I am the shepherd, and I am close, and I can see the sheep. I can see you, and I'm here for you. And again, if that's you today, and you think it would be just really helpful for someone to stand alongside you and pray into that situation, then again, I invite you in the songs that follow to come forward. There is time. There is time. And lastly, that point that Jesus calls his sheep by name. He differentiates. There's a call for everyone, but there is a call specifically for you. And maybe you are discerning that might be something going on for you at the moment. Is Jesus calling you? It might not be to go to another country. It might not even be to go to theological college. It might just be to reach out to a neighbour. It might just be to change something about the way you do your job. But it could be going to another country or considering a role in ministry or anything like that. And again, if you feel like there's something God is just saying to you and you would find it helpful, then come forward. We'd love to pray for you. So, Holy Spirit, I pray that you would be among us now, that you would be working in us. Lord, for those who have said, I believe, would you confirm that? Remind us of the party in heaven, and Lord, don't let anything suck the joy out of the miracle. Lord, for those of us who sense ourselves in a valley, may we know the closeness of the shepherd. May we know that table laid for us in the difficult situations. May we know you as our gate. And Lord, if you as our shepherd are calling specifically, open our ears and our eyes. Help us to know your voice, to recognize you, to listen for it, and when you call, to follow. Jesus, we long to bring you glory in our lives.